There can be no definitive list of themes for any text. Different readers will come up with their own lists and may even have their own takes as to what qualifies as a theme in the first place. I'll give you the list of themes I have come up with after very careful consideration. You will notice that some themes will be very similar to others and may even overlap. First, I'll list the themes I found. Then, I'll go briefly into how each theme is explored. As you should know, having a solid grasp on the themes is critical to writing an essay on this text in the exam. Here are the 12 themes: power and powerlessness, fantasy versus reality, appearance versus reality, desire versus destiny, light versus darkness, or good versus evil, prejudice and racism, alienation, bondage versus freedom, hopes, dreams and desires, childhood experiences, God, gender roles. Now let's get into how each theme comes up. We'll start with power and powerlessness. Throughout the play, we experience a distinct power imbalance between the Africans and the white people. The Africans are overpowered and controlled, captured and treated like animals. They are powerless against their captors, completely at their mercy. The Africans are powerless not only in the immediate sense that they are tied up on a ship, but in the sense that their entire future, their destiny, even the destinies of their descendants, are in the hands of the white people. However, there is more nuance to how this theme is explored. Looking beneath the surface, we see where a woman teaches a girl how to regain a sense of power, not necessarily over the white people, but over her own state of mind, her own spirit. Girl is empowered through the Anansi stories, through the understanding of her identity and what she is capable of. There are also hints that indicate that the white people in the play are not quite as powerful as they appear. For example, in the first act, Captain talks to Boy about the masters they must eventually report to. Boy is at first confused, but then Captain asks, "Do you think there's a man alive who has no master of one kind or another?" Implying that no one truly has the power to just do as they please. Over in the Forest of Stories, we see the mighty monster Man Crow and the terrible woman Her exert power over others. However, we also see that they are eventually defeated by the likes of Soliday and Anansi, indicating that even when one feels or appears to be powerless, there's always a way to achieve empowerment. Fantasy versus reality. This theme is explored through the unique form of the play, in the consistent parallelism between the harsh reality of the slave ship and the fun, vibrant forest stories. While girl and woman must suffer the dark, grim reality of being captives on their way to the plantations, we see that they find relief and strength in the fantastical world of Anansi. The forest stories also serve to break up the tension and give the reader a chance to enjoy comic relief and experience a wider variety of moods throughout the play. As the play progresses, the worlds of reality and fantasy continually converge until they're almost inseparable. This shows the extent to which girl internalizes the forest stories. Appearance versus reality. There are several cases in this play in which things appear to be one way, but are really another. The most obvious case might be in the fortitude of Anansi. Anansi, because of his physical stature, might appear insignificant, but always proves to be very powerful, outsmarting his enemies with ease. We see that in the beginning, girl sees Anansi as so little and weak, as seen in Act 1, whereas she eventually learns the true strength of this big little spider. On the surface, it appears that Captain would be wiser and smarter than Boy. After all, Captain is a man, while Boy is a boy. Also, Captain is the captain of a slave ship. However, we see that while Captain is afraid to actually think for himself, Boy proves to be wiser, daring to seek out the answers to difficult questions and challenge what is accepted as truth. Boy also seems to be well educated, even making jokes about the laws of physics. Desire versus destiny. Throughout the play, we see various situations in which the reality of characters is in direct opposition to their desires. In that, there's a battle between what they want and what is sure to happen. Consider Captain and Boy. Boy desires to pursue knowledge, to understand the world. He wants to reflect on the workings of his mind through journaling. However, Captain consistently enforces Boy's destiny. His destiny is not to learn and reflect, but to perform his duties on the ship and eventually become a captain himself. His destiny is to be like his father, a man who leads blindly, who fulfills his destiny without thought or feeling. Looking at girl, we see someone who of course desires freedom. She wants her home, her mother, She wants her happy life back. But a different destiny is given to her by the white men who capture and tie her up. She cannot look forward to a life of freedom, but must instead brace herself for a life of slavery. Light versus darkness, or good versus evil. Since the first act, the theme of light versus darkness begins. Even while girl and woman are thrown into the metaphorical darkness of captivity, they are also thrown into the literal darkness of the ship's hold. However, we see in Act 1 that a little light filters down from the crack in the roof. This light contends with the darkness. It is the hope that girl must cling to, the power and knowledge that she must awaken through her journey into the forest stories. On page 9, woman makes an interesting statement. No amount of fear and darkness can change the truth. Here, it is clear that darkness connects not only to evil, but also to ignorance, meaning that light connects not only to good, but also to wisdom. As girl focuses on the light that filters down through the crack in the roof, her endurance and confidence are boosted. Of course, girl clings not quite to the literal light, but instead to the new understandings gained from the Anansi stories. It is woman who enlightens her. In the Forest of Stories, we see the same motif of darkness and light in the story of the world blotted out. Here we see mentions of darkness in the stage directions. We see thunder rolls across the darkening sky. This darkness here signals the appearance of Mancro and represents an air of dread and hopelessness, as well as the evil of Mancro. We also see that Mancro is described as dark, huge, and horrible. Also, Mancro is said to be a monster that eats light, showing directly that the evil of Mancro is a kind of darkness strong enough to shroud light. Light only comes when Soliday defeats Mancro. When Mancro is defeated, King declares, the day is saved, the sun is bright, weakness has triumphed over might. Here, the light represents Soliday's courage, as well as the hope that he restores as he slays Mancro. More generally, we can see good versus evil as the Africans are captured, tied up, tortured, treated like animals, and thrown overboard when no longer needed. This is certainly evil, and it would appear as if evil triumphs in the end, as girl, our protagonist, ends up being sold as a slave by the end of the play. However, we can also see a victory for good, as woman cultivates a spirit of grace and compassion within girl, one that seems to override her natural inclination toward hatred and vengeance toward her captors. In Act 3, woman shows immense compassion when she challenges girl's idea that the white men deserve to die, and responds by saying that they instead need to be pitied. Prejudice and racism. This theme is obvious and rampant throughout the play. The white people on the ship, particularly captain and sailor, treat the black people, the Africans, as if they are less than human, even lower than animals. Captain makes it clear that the Africans only serve the purpose of being sold as slaves. They are just cargo, goods. Also, at Kingston Harbor, sailor makes it clear that England, unlike Jamaica, and unlike black people, is civilized. Alienation. This is one of those themes that you might not notice until you're looking for it. The African slaves, of course including girl and woman, are pulled away from their homeland. They become alienated from their people, physically separated from their culture and heritage, and dragged onto the ship where they are not treated as humans. Also, note that the slaves are even further isolated in how they are separated from one another on the ship, unable to communicate with each other, except in very limited and constrained ways, as we see with the girl and woman. Boy is also alienated, as he seems to be the only non-slave on the ship who wonders why the Africans are treated so terribly. He's curious, thoughtful, and open-minded, and we see that captain and sailor cannot understand or relate to him. He is alienated from them, finding refuge and companionship only in his diary, which he is forced to abandon. Bondage versus freedom. This is a fairly obvious theme in the text. One of the clearest differences between the Africans and the white people is that the Africans are captives while the white people are free. Girl and woman counteract their physical bondage with their mental and spiritual freedom, which they find in the forest stories. Interestingly, Captain suggests that even people like him, even a white man who exercises power, not only over slaves but also over his crewmen, even people like him aren't free. He says, do you think there's a man alive who has no master of one kind or another? Suggesting that while relative freedom exists, there is no such thing as absolute freedom, as we all have masters we must serve. We also see this theme come up in the forest stories, where both Mancro and her exert cruel power over others. The theme is more pronounced as we look at her, who enslaves children. In the end, Anansi outsmarts her, taking a half of her possessions. Right after this, we see that girl doesn't look frightened anymore, indicating that Anansi's ability to defeat her has strengthened the girl's confidence in her ability to survive slavery and perhaps one day outsmart her slave master. Hopes, dreams, and desires. A straightforward way of exploring this theme is to simply look at the most important characters and think about what they want. Let's start with girl. In the beginning, she wants to wake up from the dreadful nightmare of being on a slave ship. She wants her mother. She wants to return home. However, she soon realizes that there is no going back. What she then feels is hopelessness, even saying that she wants to die. Then, as girl warms up to woman and starts to indulge in the forest stories, we see that she also seeks comfort and companionship. She eventually sees woman as her new mother. After that, we see that girl starts asking lots of questions. Interestingly, we see a similar behavior in boy, but we'll get to him in a minute. These questions show a desire to understand. She wants to understand what is happening to her and why. She wants to know what her fate is. At the end, we see that she has found hope and strength in the forest stories. And seeing as she takes over the role of storyteller from woman, we can figure that she desires to inspire others with these same stories. As for woman, her main desire is to pass on her wisdom and strength to girl. She does not want girl to live and die as a hopeless slave, but to instead survive, to use the folklore of her motherland as a way to create her own freedom and also maintain her African identity. Like girl, boy from the beginning wishes to make sense of the world around him, and so he asks many questions and writes in his diary. He seems to come to the conclusion that what is being done to the Africans is wrong. He realizes that girl is similar to him and is appalled by how the Africans are treated. We may infer at this point that his desire is to save the Africans. However, by the end of the play, whether he eventually conforms to Captain's way of thinking or only pretends to do so, we see that he takes on the role of a captain. At this point, it is difficult to tell what boy's desires are. Next, we have Captain, who wants to run his ship as efficiently as possible and make a fortune selling the slaves he has captured. He also desires to inculcate captain-like qualities into his son. While we can look at the desires of all the characters in the play, we'll just look at one more. Anansi. Anansi's desire is different from story to story. But in a nutshell, he always wants to trick everyone else and get his hands onto some kind of prize or reward. He also wants to be renowned as the smartest creature around. He's interested not only in fortune but also in fame, as we see from the first forest story, where Anansi tricks Tiger into letting the stories be named after him, Anansi, rather than Tiger. Childhood and growth. Both girl and boy at the beginning of the play are naive children who really have no idea what is happening around them. They are both forced to grow up quickly, to adapt to the harsh reality in which they find themselves. Girl is at first afraid and confused, but eventually finds strength, courage, and wisdom, maturing into a character that is much more mature than the average child. Boy, like girl, does not get a chance to have a merry childhood, but is burdened with the responsibility of being a future captain. At first, he is curious, empathetic, and very thoughtful, but he is soon forced to abandon such virtues in order to fulfill his destiny. We see how he matures at the end of the play, as he leaves the curiosity and emotionality of boyhood behind, acting in the stead of his father, the captain, God. When Captain announces that only 3 slaves have died on the 6-day passage, he declares, "May God be thanked for it." Captain's idea of God does not at all conflict with his decision to capture and sell the Africans into slavery. In this sense, slavery, in his mind, is not evil. However, Boy doesn't easily accept that idea of God. He inquires about the true nature of God, asking what color God is. He sees glaring contradictions in the white people's view of God. God is good, yet slavery, which God apparently supports, seems evil. Also, all men are made in the image of God. Yet for some reason, the black people are not treated as if they too are made in the image of God. Boy realizes that Captain and Sailor purport an inconsistent representation of God, one that seems to be all too convenient for the white men. At the end, Boy says that he has learned the color of God, indicating that he has come to some profound understanding of God. Gender roles. When Captain sees that Boy keeps a diary, he tells him, "That sort of nonsense is for lasses. Put that away and get on with your work." This indicates that as a boy is expected to act in a certain way, as well as to avoid certain behaviors. Men are all about action and work. not writing, talking, reflecting, and certainly not critical thinking apparently. He tells Boy that the only story that counts is the one that says money makes the world go round. In other words, a man's focus must be on money, on providing, on doing his job. We see also that when Boy sits crying in a corner, Sailor tells him not to cry since he's a lad, a boy. Such vulnerable displays of emotion are not for boys or men, but for girls, for women. Woman sets a standard for what it means to be not just a woman, but a strong African matriarch. As a woman, she mothers girl, offering guidance, wisdom, and comfort, and keeps the African folktales alive by telling them to girl. We see that Gran plays a similar role as she encourages and supports Soliday as he prepares to battle Mancro. That's it for characters. Next, we'll go on to the final section of the analysis, where we look at the literary devices used in the play. See you there.